Alrighty, and we're on.
Hey, Johnny.
Say hello, Julian. So, just before we actually kicked off this podcast, Julian was actually telling me, this is the first time he's actually done a face-to-face podcast. So, how does it feel? Is it a little bit awkward, or?
No, it's just getting my head around the mic and the headphones and all that kind of stuff. Most of the
come in a little bit closer. Just it'll make it easier.
The last one I did was like a financial wellness podcast. I was providing my thoughts and perspectives on money and that was done over Zoom.
Yeah.
And but it's good.
It's a very interesting format, the podcast. And I know every podcaster probably does it a little bit differently, right? Like, so when I started this whole project, I didn't want it to be too time intensive. So the time intensive part is having the conversation, the editing and things like that. I hardly edit it. Like what do? I slap a title on it and I make sure the volume is right and I sync up the audio and the video. And that's essentially all that I do. I don't go and cut things out of episodes unless there is something that's like, somebody says afterwards, oh, I shouldn't have said that or I shouldn't have said this. And it's like, okay, I'll blank that out.
But I think that's the best way because it's really authentic.
Yeah. And I think, especially nowadays, we're in like this world of social media, right? You see snapshots of people. You've got people presenting who they are or their best foot forward, and you don't really get to understand exactly what goes on underneath the surface.
Yeah, or what their process is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
how they got to that point.
Exactly, right? And I think what that sort of fans is a little bit of like envy, right? Like you're posting these things to try and make people envious of the lifestyle that you're living, or trying to get a bit of clout from the jealousy or something like that. But I remember when I was growing up, I had this distinct thought. There was a point in my life where it's like, you look at somebody who's rich and famous, you go, oh, I'd love to be like that. But then there was a real tipping point for me where there's somebody that I admired, and I looked up to this guy. And when I say I looked up to him, it's just because from what I could see, he had a great life. He had a great profession. I think he was a dentist, and had a beautiful wife and looked like he had all the nice cars and all the nice things, right? But you don't know what's going on behind that, right?
Yeah,
and
you never do, really.
Yeah, and so I used to call it. Do you remember this movie, The Golden Child? It's like in the 80s or 90s, but I watched it when I was young. It was basically it was about this kid who was like the golden child, the next Dalai Lama or whatever. Yeah. And I call it like the golden child syndrome. So you look at this guy, you think he's got the perfect life, right? But then what you don't see is that his partner had a kidney problem, need to have a kidney removed, on dialysis, all these sort of heartaches and tribulations that you don't see. You just see this exterior perspective and you go, oh wow, this guy's living a great life, And I think for you and I, we were just quite recently, in the public eye, and people, would look at us and go, oh, who are these guys, and make guesses as to what their life is like without really understanding what you had been through or what you were going through to get to that point, right?
Yeah, and a couple of things on that. That was the first time that I'd really ever been in the public eye in terms of social media. I previously had all private accounts, with the exception of LinkedIn.
Yep.
That was the only one that was probably public.
Yep.
And so that was new for me, like Twitter and the I guess the cesspool that Twitter is, and Facebook. Never had a Facebook account.
Yeah.
Refused. Never ever had one. Think about that. Most people are on Facebook.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Like, you've got a couple of billion people in the world on Facebook. Never had a Facebook account until that point. So for me, that was new. And just second to that point about the golden child, full disclosure, I get called the golden child in my family. I got, 2 brothers, 2 sisters, so there's 5 of us.
Yep.
And I'm often called or referred to as the golden child.
There you go.
I'm not the oldest and I'm not the youngest. I'm the second. It's kind of long story behind that, but
yeah. Well, let's. I always like to. I like to know the story. So, why do they call you the golden child? What happened when you were yours?
I guess it's funny because my older brother, he was the father figure in our family from quite young. I'll come back to that, but essentially he was the father figure in the family from a young age for all of us, and he kind of left work early to try and help, left school early to go and work and help my mum and help the family. And so, he didn't finish school. He was always in trouble. It was him and his friends were, always out and about and you know, getting into fights and all that type of stuff. And so I came along. I was this kind of reading Harry Potter. I was a little bit of a nerd, and growing up, I used to kind of just sit in the corner and read and not do much else. I was playing my Game Boy and Pokemon and all that kind of stuff. But as I got older, I did really well in school, and so they used to refer to me as the golden child because my mum would she'd be really proud of me because it's like the son that's it's always something that parents want to be proud of. You know, their kids are clever or bright or doing good things. And it's not that my older brother wasn't smart; he was really smart. He just probably wasn't. And we've seen that now in his later life. He's phenomenal, and in a lot of aspects about problem solving and engineering, and he's I would say he's smarter than me, but just not everybody succeeds or excels in that type of classroom environment. He didn't really have someone like I did to look up to, so he was kind of paving the path, and then I got to go on the path that was already already paved. It's
interesting, I think, because your parents are first generation migrants to the country, right? Was it your parents that first came into the country, or grandparents?
Yeah. So they were educated here from basically high school onwards.
Okay.
Yeah. So
and so the thing that I find when people have come to the country. So when I say that, it's like, so my parents, as an example, when they came to Australia, they were the first of their family to come to Australia, and I feel like for parents in that generation, academics is always a huge thing, because what you're looking for is stability. You come to a new country where, as an example, in my parents' situation, they were a bit fortunate because they were in New Zealand before that, and they were studying university in New Zealand, so they've already picked up the English language. But, when it comes to having kids, you come with nothing. Like my parents literally, my dad, for whatever reason, as an accountant, couldn't get a visa in New Zealand. So they jumped on a cruise boat to come to Sydney, and then ended up staying here and had to build a life from that, like just with the suitcases that they had after leaving New Zealand. My brother was, already born at that stage, and then they came here, and then they started with nothing, right? So, at that point in their lives, like they're thinking about, okay, how do I establish themselves? How do they make a living? And what's important from that perspective? And so I always talk about this because I think it's really important that, people in the next generation, so like my generation, where it's like, I'm so fortunate that I can spend time with my kids that my parents probably couldn't afford to spend with me, because they're always working. They're always trying to build a better life for us. And so, why Asian parents and I guess ethnic parents always have this hard thing about academics is because they view that as the key to stability, right?
Yeah, and I think they also didn't, especially with my parents didn't have access to any kind of higher education. It was high school, and it was kind of public schools. It was, they came from very, very humble beginnings. My mum was one of 9. So big family, and probably, I guess probably after I don't know, maybe year 6, she couldn't help me with my homework anymore. No offense, but it's just different, right? And I think one thing that I've always looked at is I try and be, and it's human evolution. We just want to be better or more successful than the previous generation. I want to leave this world better than I started it. Basically, is the goal, and it's for me, it's I want to be able to pass that on, I guess to my children, and hopefully they can do the same. So we're just propelling each other forward. And that's, I think, what the education thing is. They knew that was a key part of what they were missing, and it meant that they couldn't get the best jobs, and they were working really hard for the dollar that they were earning, and so they wanted something that was, I guess, better for us, and so we can propel. And now I understand, as much as I hated school, and I really hated school, I understand the importance of that, because I see people. And all the time they're kind of trapped in these kind of, I wouldn't call them dead end jobs, but there's a real lack of, I guess, prospects. There's a real lack of prospects for them, because they're kind of. But that was one thing I learned very early on, that you need to continue to make sure that you're always learning, reteaching yourself, and have this constant white belt mentality. I always say that to people: you should always be a white belt at something. and it's a martial arts
analogy.
But it's so true. You know, if you're really good at finance, well, go and learn technology. If you're really good at technology, go and learn something else that kind of can relate or can intertwine. You know, whether it's learning how to code or learning data science or data analytics or whatever it is, go and start something new that you enjoy, or something that's just really, really challenging, whether it is a physical or a mental endeavor, but be a white belt at something.
I think, you know, for those, there are people that out there that are feeling like, oh, they don't know what they enjoy, right? And that's where it's like, you know, if you don't really know what you enjoy, it's pretty hard to then start something and see it through. Because everything that you start, you sort of go, oh, I don't really enjoy this. Oh, I don't really enjoy this. But sometimes I think the enjoyment comes when you actually develop the competence.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like
that's my story with jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
You know, I was really out of shape. I hadn't trained for a very long time. You had a bad knee injury, MCL, that was kind of didn't really rehab properly, so it was giving me troubles. And I was like, okay, I need to get back in shape. But I'm not the sort of person that can go to a gym and run on a treadmill. I just don't. There's nothing interesting about that. I'm more of a sport person. And I played rugby league growing up, and we can get into that. But I guess for me, it was like, okay, I really want to start jiu-jitsu. I've been following MMA for a long time, been following jiu-jitsu competitions for a long time, and I wanted to do it. So I was like, okay. And then Robert Whittaker and his coach opened a new gym that was at my previous office in the previous business I was in. It was 2 streets away. And I was like, there's no more excuses, you know.
There you go.
But I literally, the first session, I didn't even finish it. I was that tired. I was that I felt like I was going to throw up, and I was like, oh, surely it gets better from here. And then I really enjoyed it for probably about 6 weeks. Really enjoyed it. I was there every morning, you know, first thing up at 5 a.m, getting to the morning class. I live in Granville, Parramatta. So for me, you know, driving all the way to Artarmon that early in the morning to get there, it was commitment, and I was ready to do that. But it got to a point where I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. I'm not enjoying it at all. And I was like, you know, if you quit, right, it's going to be one of those things that you tried, and it's just going to fade into the background, and you kind of, and so I persisted. And, you know, once I started to feel, you know, like I was actually understanding it and getting better at it, I'd completely fell in love, got addicted to it. And I was sometimes, you know, going to lunchtime classes, you know, instead of taking a lunch break, I'm like, no, I reckon I can squeeze in a session. I can squeeze in a training session. So I think that goes to, you know, find something that you're passionate about. And sometimes the passion doesn't come straight away. Sometimes it's immediate. And you kind of see people, they start and then they never leave or they're committed completely. But sometimes it takes a little while. It could be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. And also sometimes it could just be that gym's not a fit, you know, so, or, you know, that particular teacher or coach. And so I'm very glad that I found a gym that has fantastic coaches, great culture, all that type of stuff. And that certainly helped keep me there. I think if it was probably in another gym, and, you know, I'm grateful that I had guys like Chris Casaselli and Lucas Sachs, who were the coaches for those morning classes. And it was just, it was fantastic. Really happy that I started it and haven't given up.
Yeah, well, and that's the biggest thing, is actually just sticking with it, right? And that's what I mean, like, you know, the people that don't really know what they want to do in life, it's like, okay, just start something, right? And if you persevere with it, opportunities might open up, and where you start doesn't necessarily mean that's where you end up and finish, right? You start in one particular role, and let's take as an example, it might be as simple as, like, you know, working as at McDonald's. Doesn't sound like much, but let's say you start working at McDonald's and you don't know why you're doing this, but what do you learn out of that role? Well, you learn about processes, you learn about customer service. You know, you learn some of these things that if you actually apply yourself, rather than just think of it, this is just a dead end job, I'm just here, you know, to make a little bit of money, but then look at it, okay, what are the lessons that I can actually glean from this opportunity? It's the old, you know, Miyamoto Musashi quote of, once you see the way in one thing, you can see it in everything. Right? So if you can understand what is good customer service in that industry, you know, we're talking about, you know, food and beverage, right? You can then understand what is good customer service in hospitality, right? It's only a stone's throw away. Maybe you prefer hospitality. Maybe you don't like hospitality at all. and then you realize, okay, I'm not good at the customer service element. Okay, so what is it that you're good at? Oh, you might be good at the processes. Maybe you need to go into a training role.
Yeah, like
right?
more of a back office role.
Yeah, right. But like until you actually go down that pathway and put the investment in, you don't really realize what it is that you are good at, right? And then the things that you then develop, those skills, you can then transfer them somewhere else, right? You go to a different industry, at least you know what good customer service is, at least you know how to follow processes. You might even get to the point where you're managing people, right? And yes, you might be managing a young team and people go, oh, what, you're just a floor manager at McDonald's. Oh, it's not really much. But at the same time, it's still managing people.
But I have to say that using that same example, McDonald's, when I see McDonald's as like someone's on someone's resume, I actually rank that pretty highly because I know that the type of people that worked at McDonald's, there's usually no ego. So if someone was prepared to say, okay, I'm going to go get a job at McDonald's. I know that it's kind of entry level, but I'm just going to start and that's going to be my foot in the door somewhere else. But also the training and procedures and things that they have are actually really good. And the people that, so two of my family members worked at McDonald's. I never did. I worked at Super Cheap Auto, but similar kind of thing. There was training in place and I learned so much and I was just fortunate that I didn't have to flip burgers because I was super passionate about cars and maybe that's kind of my, the earliest love that I had was being obsessed with cars and engines and accessories and, performance cars. It was kind of growing up, that was the Fast and the Furious generation, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And, but the amount of people that I see that have McDonald's like first job on their resume turn out to be fantastic employees. It's almost like it's like a marker of like, okay, shortlist this candidate because they're going to understand how to follow a process and almost like a production line. Like they understand how important their role is
in the whole
scheme of things.
Yeah.
And that's some of those soft skills are hard to teach people. They all every day, nowadays you see people, they're just really, really selfish. They just care about themselves. They don't think they all want, more money and want, all types of things, but they're not prepared to work for it, or they're not prepared to look from their employer's perspective and say, okay, well, what is it that I can do to kind of show you that I'm adding value?
Yeah.
It's me.
Well, I think people get complacent. They get to this level and they go, oh, okay. And I'll use medical profession as an example, right? The amount of, and I'm not talking shit on GPs, right? But the amount of times that I've, seen a GP or whatever, and this GP looks unhealthy, overweight, smoker, whatever, you name it.
I was talking about this exact same thing.
And it's like, if you were going to somewhere like a gym as an example, and you wanted a PT, a personal trainer, to get you into shape, I'm sorry, but if I was going to go to a gym, I would not go to a fat PT.
Yeah.
Right. Because I want to see somebody who's living by example. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, I was listening to something just before and it was talking about how, like with kids, right? Yeah, you can tell your kids don't do this or don't do that. But if you're setting the wrong example, your kids are going to follow your example, not what you say.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's the same thing. Like I just feel like, people get this level of complacency. Oh, I've ticked the box. I've got the qualification. All right. But how much are you continuing to your education further in that, right? It applies to coaches in martial arts as well. You open up a school and then what? Does that mean that your learning stops just because you're the coach? You still need to be going out and pulling new ideas and getting new ideas and trying to work out, okay, how does this fit in? And because the game's evolving.
Yeah.
Right. We see this
Danaher and these leg locks.
Well, you look at, just the recent ADCC. So for those that don't know, ADCC is like the Olympics of jiu-jitsu or grappling. And it was just recently held and, there was a lot of surprises on that list, I think. But the level that you can see of people is so phenomenally high. And for anyone that trains jiu-jitsu, like everybody would love to be at that level, right? Like if you're into jiu-jitsu or grappling, you'd be like, oh, I'd love to be on that level. But you also got to think, how much time are these people dedicating to it, right? These are guys that are training,
7 days a week,
multiple times a day, right? So, you can be the academy owner and or gym owner and just go, oh, yep, I teach my class and that's it. But how relentless are you in that pursuit of getting better at things, And that's one of the reasons why, for me personally, I haven't gone into coaching, is because I feel like there's still so much knowledge out there that I want to soak up. And once you sort of go into that pathway, I feel like, look, I still think you can do it, but I feel like, there's always that little bit of a hindrance because, people then go, if you're here, how can you be here but there and all these other places that you want to go to, right? Like there's something nice about having freedom.
Yeah, I understand.
I don't know if that makes sense.
And look, sometimes when you see people, they're kind of a little bit flat or stagnant in their development. One of the ways that, especially I noticed in my team, if I want to get them to the next level, what I do is I get them to teach someone else. That actually gets them to that next level.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you are going to talk about becoming a full-time coach, then it's definitely going to impact your ability to train and kind of continue to learn and develop, where you can almost do things whatever way you wish.
Yeah.
When you become a coach, you almost need to follow a system or something that's easy to teach and easy to learn. So it does pigeonhole you a little bit.
Yep. And the other thing that I'm always mindful of is that I know I'd be obsessed, right? And that obsession comes at the detriment of my family, right? Like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like when
I know that, mate.
Yeah. So when you're obsessed with something, it's like, and I sometimes get into this thing where it's like, let's say I'm reading a really good book, right? Like I could, if there's a book that I'm really into, I'll tear through that book within 24 hours.
Yeah.
But like I'm not really there as a father. Like it's like my kids are there, my phone's here, and I'm reading the book and I'm watching the kids, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But like if I get obsessed, I need to complete it. I need to finish this task before I can move on with my life.
Yeah. I think a lot of people that I guess the high functioning or successful people, they have that, they want to commit completely, and it is obsession. And for me, I get obsessed very, very easily. So I'm actually careful now on things like my younger brother's been playing a lot of golf, and he's like, "You got to come with me." Now I'm really, really being careful because I'll become obsessed, and then I'll be on the golf course every day.
Yeah.
So I've got to be careful. But just identifying that, but a lot of that obsession is actually what makes you really good at things. And so you don't want to stop that or kind of go away from that, because then you'll, in my opinion, that's what mediocre people do. They kind of quit easily, or they kind of commit half, and they don't really immerse themselves. Like if I'm learning whatever it is, I want to watch all the YouTube videos. I want to see all the perspectives on it. I want to read the reviews on the product. I go like deep. All in, all in. And so same thing. My wife's like, okay, I know that you do that. I'm expecting, and so when she sees a new hobby or a new something pop up, she goes, "Oh, here we go again."
Yeah,
I'm not going to see you.
Yeah. It was like that for me. One day I came home with a compound bow, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I'm getting into archery." That's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But thankfully, my I actually did all right with archery simply because from the martial arts perspective, you got the strength. It was just about training the muscles. So I wouldn't say I'm like the best shot, but like I can go away and have time off from the field. And then when I go with some of the guys that I shoot with, it's like, I can actually get back in the swing of it pretty well. It's just the endurance element that fades over time because, unless you're shooting every day, you're not going to train those muscles to keep shooting with the same accuracy.
Yeah.
But anyway, I digress. Let's wind it back a little bit. So, when it came to your childhood, you mentioned your brother, gave up school and went to the workforce quite young. What was the reason behind that?
Yeah. So, growing up, I grew up in a dual parent household until probably I was about 13. Up until that point, my father, he was quite abusive.
Oh.
To my mum, and so we're kind of domestic violence family, and obviously there was some. I guess at times it was really difficult. My mum went through a really tough time. And eventually, I guess, got the courage to kind of leave and felt like she had the support network of her brothers and sisters to kind of stay until we found we were kind of sleeping over at my cousin's and things like that while we found a place to stay. And tragically, around the same time, my mum's, both of her parents passed away within 3 months. So, it was kind of at that point, it was like she was my grandfather was sick. He had leukemia, and he was really sick for a long time and suffered quite a bit. and she was taking care of him with her other brothers and sisters, but that meant she was out of the house a lot, and so she couldn't really do anything about it. And then when he was felt like he was getting a bit better, my grandmother actually suddenly passed away. It was unexpected.
Yep.
And so my grandfather got worse, and within 3 months he passed away as well. Kind of lost his life partner. And so after that, my mum packed her stuff, and we stayed at my cousin's place for a couple of weeks, and then eventually she bought my grandparents' house, which was their family home growing up with the 9 of them when they arrived in Australia. That house, and she's still in that house today. So we grew up in that house, and I guess that was really why that happened. My younger brother was kind of tossed into a. I would have been a bit younger. I probably would have been about 11 or 12, because I still remember my brother was probably only kind of 15. He's 3 years older than me, so he was kind of tossed into a position where he certainly wasn't prepared for it. But being the kind of the oldest man in the house, and watching my mum kind of work multiple jobs, and he kind of helped look after us, and and so that's kind of that's the story. I mean,
okay,
it's the short version.
No, that's okay. So just thinking about that, right? So it brought back some memories for me. So when I was growing up, my parents used to fight quite a bit, and sometimes it was violent. Like there was a couple of times where the cops were called, and I remember once where I think my mum smashed a plate over my dad's head, cut his head open, and I remember this time where it was like my parents were arguing, and then my brother and I had to line up, and we're lining up in the kitchen, and they were like talking about us or something, and yelling at each other, and like I don't really remember what the fight was over, but I do remember seeing like feeling that sort of what's the right word? It's like that uncomfortable feeling of being in the room when it seems like two people don't want to get along and don't want to be together. I guess for you growing up, so if you were 11 or 12 when that happened, did you witness any of the violence yourself?
Yeah, a lot of it.
Yeah.
And I guess one thing, look, hindsight's 20/20, right? But if I was to say, for sure, I reckon it's that type of experience can do two things. Like it can either make you a better person because you know how not to behave, right? Or it can make you worse. Like some people can't deal with that. Their parents getting a divorce and, physical abuse and gaslighting and all the rest of it. Some people just can't get over that, and it kind of sends them down a downward spiral.
Yep.
But there's a really great saying. My father was he was an alcoholic, so that was a lot of it.
So a lot of the issues.
A lot of the issues stemmed from alcohol. And there's a really famous saying or quote, and it says something. Or I guess it's a story or a proverb, and it talks about two brothers, and one of them gets asked the question, why is it that you I guess, why is it that you drink so much? And he said, I learned from my father. And the other brother gets asked the same question, but it's, why is it that you don't drink? And he says, I learned from my father as well. So so for me, that's kind of shaped, in my opinion, who I am today, because, between that kind of those teenage years up until the point where I was 23, 24, I didn't drink one drop of alcohol, not one. Like if a dessert had alcohol in it, I wouldn't touch it. And that was just a personal decision that I made about what type of man I want to be. And in my opinion, it held me or put me in a great position career-wise, because where I was coming in fresh on Monday morning and, even working in the automotive industry, working weekends, people were coming in on Saturday, Sunday morning, dusty as, and I was coming in fresh, and, it allowed me to excel and accelerate my career. So there's a lot of great things that came out of that. And it was a long-running joke where a lot of my family and friends and stuff like that would say, okay, I know you don't drink, but surely you'll drink at your brother's wedding. Like surely that's a big enough, okay? And they'd pose all of these different big monumental occasions and scenarios to see if I would budge. But I had an iron will. But I said, at once I said to I think my cousin asked me that question. Surely you would drink at your brother's wedding. And I said, all right, fine. I'll have a beer at my brother's wedding. And so I did. I did my best man speech, and then I had a skull of beer after it. And that was big. Anyone who was inside, to most people, they would have looked at that and said, oh, he's just drinking a beer. Like, best man, that's what best men do. But for everyone inside my family, they knew how big that was. Like, that was a big, big moment for me. Just personally, I'd made that decision. I'd went, all my life not having a sip. And so even now, like, I rarely ever drink. It's got to be a good occasion. Weddings are usually, I'll have a couple, or if it's a social environment, or, in the business world, everyone around me is having a beer. I'll have one beer, maximum two, and that's it. And I still don't like doing that. It's just kind of one of those things where it's just much easier to have a beer than to explain why.
Go into this
just give me a
massive
beer. I'm not gonna, because then they start asking questions, and it makes the whole conversation go in a direction. And it's just like, I don't want to spend an hour talking to people about my personal decisions. Easier to drink a beer.
Out of curiosity, so have you spoken to your father since? Like, I guess, what's your relationship with him now?
Now it's almost non-existent, but it was, we still saw him a lot, and we'd go and visit, and his parents had a farm, and we kind of grew up, going to that farm quite frequently. And then when my parents got separated, he was living there, so we'd go there even more frequently to see him. And I guess there's a few things that happen, but he's just a really selfish man. Always, victimized. Like, he was always the victim. My mum was, really encouraged us to stay and have a good relationship with him. But I think as kids, we'd probably never really forgiven him for what he did. And we saw all the struggles that my mum had, working multiple jobs and, struggling, like literally making sure that we ate and she wouldn't eat. She'd pretend she wasn't hungry, but she'd just make sure we all ate first, and then she'd eat with the left. Like, that's literally, growing up. So, and, my older brother did a great job. He was very helpful. He supported her financially. And then it got to a point where I was old enough. I got a job and started supporting financially. And then really the first good job I had was in the automotive industry. And the first time I got a commission check, I put a deposit down on a car and bought her a brand new car. She was driving an Excel, owned by Excel, and that was a beast of a thing. And but I was just like, this is a small thing that I can do to, I guess, to help her. Like, she's driving around with my younger siblings in a car that's like falling apart, literally. So that was it. But just going back to your point, there was a couple of things that happened with my dad and his brothers. Like, just every time we'd go there, it kind of, one time we were playing cards, and they're just very different. And we'd kind of, the more time we spent away from my father and his side, the more we realized that we were very different to them. Even though it'd only been a couple of years since it became really eye-opening how different we were to that side of the family. Both sides really, but especially that side. And so my uncle once had he basically yelled at my little brother, and it was over a game of cards. I was like, this is my younger brother. He's a kid. He's 4 years younger than me. So however old I was probably 16 or 17 at that point. I would have been 17 actually, because I drove, and I put him and my younger sister in the car, and we just drove back from the farm. Like, I had a big blow up with them, and after that I just didn't really engage. I thought if they want to see us, like, we'll go, and we did a couple of times, but it became very clear that we were always the ones following up and reaching out. So I still remember one day this is my birthday is September 4. I just turned 30. So he called And my older brother's birthday is October 13. My dad's birthday is October 10. But he called up on like the 13th of October. He's like, how come you guys didn't wish me happy birthday and going, all this kind of stuff. But it was actually my older brother's birthday that day. Yeah. And he didn't wish him happy birthday either because he just didn't give a shit. He was talking about himself. And he didn't wish me happy birthday the month before.
Yeah.
So it was just things like that. I was like, if he wants to engage and come, no problem. I'll never say no.
Yeah.
But, and then just drifted apart. It became very different. I became really focused on my career and just looking after my immediate family. So, we kind of drifted apart from both sides of my mum's side and my dad's side. We kind of didn't, we realized that we just needed to look after each other. And we have a really, really close relationship, all of our siblings. It's hard to explain, but, when you go through kind of adversity and a lot of people have overcome adversity, but there's something special about when you see the bond with my family, how we look after each other, how we look out for each other. So that was kind of how we drifted apart. Yeah. And we've had kids now. I've got 2 kids. I'm married. My younger brother's engaged. My older brother's got 2 kids, married as well. My sister's married, has 1 kid. And my youngest sister is she's too young for any of that. So but hasn't met any of the kids.
Yeah.
So
I guess, and I'm just curious, did that ever, was there any, what's the right word? It's sort of like not remorse, but like, did you harbor any resentment in your own heart? Like, was there a time where you felt like, the only person, like I resent my dad for everything, for these things that have happened?
Yeah, for sure. It's not something that is I think about too often because I keep myself really, really busy, so there's not a lot of time to think about other things. But the most important thing is that I'm going to set a good example for what a father should be to my kids. And there's lines that you don't cross. You can argue, and every couple argues, but you should never put hands on a woman. Full stop.
Yep.
Doesn't matter. Alcohol is not an excuse, yep. And drugs is not an excuse. It should never be that way. So it's just simple. That's the way I see it. You put hands on a woman, I've got no time for you. That's it. So.
Yeah. The reason why I ask that is because I know for me, I had a very fractured relationship with my dad for a very long period of time, and that was some things happened obviously between my parents, and my dad did the wrong thing by my mum, and I took it very personally, like obviously seeing what my mum went through and seeing her tears and her crying over things that had happened. And so I know for me, like there was many years where I resented him, right?
Yeah.
I didn't want to be anything like my dad.
Yeah.
Right. But I know that also, for lack of a better word, fucked me up in a lot of ways.
You got to be careful not to hold on to it.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm grateful in a lot of ways. It's really shit that I have to say this, but I'm grateful for what happened. I'm sorry that my mum had to go through that, but I think even she would say this now. I'm just glad that you guys all turned out the way that you did, because we have, we're much better. It could have been worse, and she could have stayed, and we could have been subject to more of that, and maybe eventually would have turned to us, because you get to a point where you're old enough to do something about it.
Yeah.
And I mean, who knows what would happen,
yeah.
right? And I think my mum saw that, because at that time my brother would have been 14, 15. 14, 15 years old. So so he started trying to do something about it. I even started, to try and do something about it and stop him, and, kind of but yeah, I think my mum saw that and was like, this isn't going to end well. Yeah, we need to go. But I saw my dad. He came to visit me at the pre-polling. His family, that they're all proud of me, and they kind of watch on from the sidelines, seeing our family. And I don't harbor resentment towards him as a person. Like now, I think that he's a very different person now. But at the time, and growing up, it's like, I'm glad that I didn't grow up thinking that was normal. If we'd stayed and thought that this was normal, I think we would have been worse for it for sure.
Was there a particular point where you let go of that resentment? Like, was there something that had happened, or like did one day you just wake up and go, okay, I don't resent you anymore?
No, the resentment is not towards him as such. Like, it's not like if I see him, I hug and kiss him, ask him how he is. But it's like I've kind of moved past it so far that it's almost like that. Yeah, it's hard to explain really. I haven't kind of thought about it in depth, but the way I see it is like it's almost like, okay, he did that, and I've cut that aspect of him away, and so now he's over here, and if he wants to interact, we'll interact. But as far as like my immediate family, I don't consider him part of my immediate family. All the milestones, all the things that he should have been there for, he wasn't.
Yeah.
So and that's on him, not on me, not on anybody else. He only has himself to blame for that.
Yeah.
But I don't. It's kind of one of those things. I barely think about it now.
Yeah.
So it's kind of so far gone. I'm 30 now.
Yep.
This is like more than half of my life away ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've got my own kids to look after. I've got nephews and nieces that I like try and set a good example for. Even my younger brother, my younger sisters. Try and set a good example for those, and even employees now, right? Like people are always looking to you for leadership or for how things should be done.
Yep.
And so I filled that gap, and my brother did a great job. He was a mechanic, and so he found ways to kind of incorporate me and show me. Taught me how to change tire, service cars. He taught me everything that how to use tools and power tools, and all. He did everything that a dad was meant to do. Help me kind of dress right, and how to tie a tie and wear a suit, and all the stuff that you look to your dad for. He did all of that. How to be a man, how to provide for your family, how to do all of that. So in some respects, it made my older brother step up, and maybe he wasn't ready for it, but I think he knows I'm very grateful for that.
It made him grow.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the reason why I was curious about that is because for me, I had a very distinct moment where I just let it go, right? And I guess for me, it was like I remember having some kind, whether it was a dream or something like that, and then I woke up and I just it's like just one day I realized, hey, the only person this is hurting is me.
Yeah.
Right. Having this sort of resentment, and it's that analogy about holding the cup. It's not about how full the cup is; it's about how long you hold onto it. If you keep holding it there with a straight arm, over time, it's going to wear you down, and your muscles are going to get sore. And so I think I just got to that point where I was like, the only person this is hurting is me now. So I need to let it go.
There was one point. My grandfather passed away, my dad's dad, and separate to the story I told before about my mum's dad passing away. So he passed away, and I went and saw kind of that whole side of the family. Went to the wake and stuff, and that was a moment I felt really bad for him because that was his dad, and I started asking questions like if something, God forbid, was to happen to my dad now, would I be happy and content with my relationship with him?
Yep.
So I have reflected on it before. It's just I haven't really thought about, because to me, I've completely let go and cut off that part, right? So it's like, okay, that's a separate thing altogether. So I don't think it's weighed me down personally. Maybe if I sat down with a psych and they evaluated, maybe. But as far as I can see, I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah.
I don't have any kind of unhealthy relationships or toxic relationships that kind of are a reflection of my relationship with my dad or anything like that. I think I get along pretty well with everyone. I don't have any problems there. So I don't know. Of course, when I analyze things, I like to analyze them properly.
Yeah.
But this is one area that I probably haven't kind of
spent the time
to really understand where do I sit on it right now.
Yeah.
I think because...
But I think if it's not negatively impacting your life, it's not as important.
Yeah. And there's been other things in my life that have kind of been negatively impacting me, and I've reflected on it and I've made a decision on which way I want to go forward. And that's friends that kind of didn't do the right thing by me and things like that. And I've been able to let go of them, forgive them, and move forward, because I understand that those things can weigh you down, like you said.
Yeah.
I don't think this is one of them, though. I think this is what I would consider to be character building.
Yep.
And it's part of my origin story.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
it's one of those things that, like, people always ask, oh, would you change anything about your childhood? Well, no, because you wouldn't be the same person.
Yeah.
Right?
For me, that's 100% the case.
Yeah.
I think as horrific as it was to kind of go through, especially for my mum, she taught me lessons that there's no way my father could have taught me. Just in terms of the, Joey Diaz says immigrant mentality. My mum has immigrant mentality. She's relentless, and she's one of my biggest supporters, along with my wife. And so she's kind of coincidentally got a reasonably similar story. But I think just watching how hard my mum worked and how she managed money. I don't know how she did it. 5 kids, single mum. No real education, no kind of professional qualifications. She did a great job, and she taught us lessons that we kind of never would have learned otherwise.
Okay. So, going through schooling, so you mentioned you were a bit of the nerdy kid, right? You like to read, like to play Game Boy, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that was definitely primary school. High school, it was more, I became obsessed with sport.
Okay.
And I was training or competing 6 days a week, sometimes 7. And that was, school sport.
Yep.
And then weekend rugby league, and obviously the training sessions that would go in through the week. And then it was just, we were obsessed with playing football. So we would play recess, we would play at lunch, we would train in the afternoon, never kind of did any real stretching or recovery, which I regret now. But, so I became more obsessed with sport, and probably later, in high school, became really obsessed with cars. And that was after, my brother had, he was a mechanic, and he had some project cars, and that we kind of worked on together in the backyard. And so I became really obsessed, to the point where if a car was, coming down the street really fast, I could tell you what car it was.
Yep.
Just by the sound of the engine.
And the exhaust
gear
note.
shifts and all that type of stuff. But sport kept me busy. And I think for young men, I think that's so important. I think you can't underestimate how good that was for me. You kind of teenage boy, got all these problems, and one thing that kind of helped a lot was playing rugby league, because you got an opportunity to
take it out on someone,
get some of that anger out, and that sense of working as a team and mateship, camaraderie. It definitely takes your mind off things and just makes it easier to deal with. Also had a great school teacher, our coordinator, who kind of looked after me and my family. She was pretty across what was going on in my family.
Oh, wow.
So I think that was I think without those kind of support networks to kind of keep an eye on me, and she wasn't scared to pull me up and go, looks like you're having a bad day. Just spend the day with me in my office.
Oh, wow.
And just take some time out of because look, shout out Miss Walsh, but if you don't have someone there that you can kind of I guess confide in or talk to or whatever, it's definitely a lot harder. And blokes don't talk about these kinds of things, and I really didn't, but she was able to look at me and see, okay, he's having a bad day.
With you.
Yeah, having a bad day. Come, just take some time out. She also, there's also a lot of cool little perks. Like if I got my phone confiscated, I'd go to her and she'd just give it right back. So I think it was you build relationships with certain teachers, and they kind of see I don't know, maybe they see something in you, or maybe they pity you, or maybe they I don't know what it is exactly, but I'm thankful for it either way.
Yeah. Well, I think good teachers are able to sort of pick up on when a kid has, whether it's difficulties learning or difficulties in their life, because those sorts of things play out in the classroom, right? Whether it's their relationships with their mates, or somebody's having has a temper. There's reasons why it's that way, right? And as I said, monkey see, monkey do, right? Like your kids pick up on what your parents do. So sometimes these things appear, and then a good teacher will be able to pick up on that, and then sort of pull that kid aside and can make a dramatic impact on that kid's life.
Yeah, and also I mean I shouted out one teacher. There's another one who I think was probably, he still teaches at the school too. So I don't know if I want to say his name, but everyone knows him. He would get the young men that were kind of a bit troubled, getting in fights all the time, and he'd bring them to a boxing class and
let them hash it out.
He just teach them that you can direct or channel all that kind of angst. And when you're a 15-year-old boy, man, you're pumped full of testosterone.
Yeah, you're looking for an outlet.
You're looking for an outlet. Whether you got things going on in your life or not, you don't know how to deal with these kind of things. But so he's still teaching there. I want to say his name because I want to say thank you, but I think he knows who he is anyway. And another one that kind of looked out for my family, because we get 5 of us go through the same school. So he kind of saw 1, 2, 3, 4, and my sister still goes there now. So yeah.
Okay. So then when you came to the end of high school, did you have any idea what you wanted to do after that?
Actually, yes. Up until the point I was in year 11 or year 12, I'd structured all my subjects in a way that I was going to be a police officer. Okay. That's what I wanted to do. I completely convinced myself that's what I want to do. I loved it. Probably until year 12. I didn't change my mind until maybe 3 months into year 12. I got talked out of being a police officer. And I think it was just convenient timing. A few people told me, look, you need to look at the people's relationships that are cops. They seem to be getting divorced a lot. And I don't know what the stats are on that, but anecdotally in my life at the time, the cops that I knew had terrible relationships or had just been recently divorced. I was like, shit, like maybe there's something to that. And it might have something to do with the shift work. But I was like, how can you, like 4 days on, 3 days off, like kind of this rotational roster stuff. I was like, surely you have enough time to, spend with your family. But I guess part of it is probably you see some stuff or get involved in some stuff that probably keeps you in a high stress mode, like a fight or flight type mode. And so when you go home, you kind of
you carry that with you.
Yeah, you carry that with you. And so I thought about it, and I was like, at the time I was doing really well in IT. I ended up getting 92 in IT for my high school certificate. Mm-hmm. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do something in IT. So I left school and enrolled in a web development course. Okay. And that's kind of where I was already like I said, a nerd, a tech nerd. I was the IT support for my entire family and extended family. And
have you reset the computer yet?
Yeah, I felt like I should have set up a hotline because my phone was ringing every day with that stuff. But I wanted to do IT. I wanted to do web development. And so I enrolled in the course. I was full-time study, and I was trying to manage full-time work and full-time study. You can imagine that was probably not the smartest thing, but I needed to work full-time with the financial situation at home. And so I was doing that. I was actually working at Sutton's at the time. Yep. And I was driving to Rosebery from Granville. Yep. Which is a nightmare to get to.
Of course.
And I just couldn't cope with that. I was getting home so they start at 8 and finish at 6. But I remember my first day, I got there at 7:55 thinking, oh yeah, I'm early. Yeah. I said, mate, where have you been? You're late. Yeah. And I said, oh, no, we start at 8. You guys said we start at 8. They're like, yeah, we start at 8. You need to be here at 7:30.
Yeah, you need to be ready to start at 8.
To open the yard and do all that kind of stuff. So that was a bit of a rude shock awakening from school, right? I was always late every day at school because I just didn't give a shit and then go to work. So I probably went, 3-4 months. I learned a lot in that time because I was essentially a sales trainee or a cadet. Yep. I learned a lot, and but I just couldn't. So I gave up the web development course because I thought that I could make good money, in sales job, and I thought I'll come back to that at some point. And actually, no, sorry, I quit that job because I got offered a job in at Peninsula Motor Group, which was in like Milpera, Bankstown area.
Closer.
And I was like 20 minutes from my house. I was thrilled. And so I tried to manage the full-time study and the full-time work at Peninsula.
Yep.
And that was actually an aftermarket sales position.
Okay.
Yeah, so
you were the Ming Mole.
Yeah, well, I went from like super cheap auto selling car parts and accessories to car sales, and I didn't like car sales as much. So I was like, if there's a way that I can sell car parts and accessories,
that's
like
what you want
get
to do.
better pay, then I'll do that. So I did that, and I did pretty well for a guy. For those of you who don't know, there's like stereotypical position in the dealership. After you buy a car, they take you over to meet an aftermarket consultant who might have a different job title, but
pre-delivery coordinator,
something like that.
Delivery coordinator,
customer
aftercare
care specialist,
customer care
whatever,
specialist.
But the stereotypical position is a very good-looking female who's going to upsell you with some serious selling skills, and so you've just spent most likely, if the salesman did a good job, they already made you spend more than you wanted to.
Yep.
And then you get taken over and they're like, oh, but don't you want window tint? Don't you want to protect your paint? You just spent $50,000 on a car. You telling me you're going to not spend a little bit more and protect your paint?
And why they're called a Ming Mole is because Ming used to be the name of the product that they used to sell. And it's a derogatory term, but I guess it's an industry stereotype, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's interesting for you to be a male in that position.
Yeah, and I think I did pretty well, considering I didn't have the good looks to kind of help me sell. But so I did that, and I still couldn't manage full-time work, full-time study. I was falling behind in the classes, and so what I decided to do was just focus on work. I was making good money, and I thought, again, I'll come back to the study at some point. And so I got rid of study, but I still kept that as like a side thing. I kept wanting to build web development or app development projects. So I actually built and developed an app. And mind you, I was 19 at this point in time. I developed an app and deployed it on the App Store. And I started earning some ad revenue. What it was, at the time, it was a cool idea because there was no real app that kind of did. It was like a new sports news aggregation app, but then like Flipboard came out and they did a way better job than me. So basically I just kind of gave up on it. But at one point I was earning like $1,000 a month in ad revenue.
Pretty good. Yeah, just from people who are on the site or on your app, and then they get shown the ads.
You get shown the ads and kind of download whatever it was, Angry Birds or whatever app was being advertised. But I kept that as like a thing that I always wanted to work on in the side. So everything in my job I would look at and go, okay, can I automate this? Can I build something to make my job easier? Because in dealerships they don't use technology. They're like dinosaurs compared to the rest of the world. A lot of it's pen and paper and things like that. So I started
especially
back
then.
Back then. This is like 12 years ago.
But I think even in today's world, a lot of dealerships don't use the DMS the right way. Like there's so many things that you can do within your DMS. Yeah. Except people just, they build a workaround because it's easier, so to speak. Yeah. But if you just did it right, if you go to the root cause, right? Like it's problem solving 101 is that you don't just go and slap a Band-Aid on the symptom. You actually got to go back and try and address the root cause. Well, the root cause of why it doesn't work is because the information that you input is shit.
Yeah, that's right.
Whether your data's incorrect or your data's missing, there's missing data sets. So that then when you go and extract that data that you want to do something with, you go, oh, there's all these holes. We can't use it. Well, let's go and build something else to go and plug in on top of it. But they never address the core issue of, okay, guys, all you need to do is just make sure that the data goes in right.
And look, in that job, this is kind of how I got into finance, right? Because maths was the other subject I was really good at. So I always had a keen interest. I was like, I wonder how this works. And then I heard how much money they make, and I was like, this is absurd. Why am I not doing this? I'd seen from other dealerships that the caliber of person in there was not great. I don't like to think of myself as someone who compares themselves to others, but it was kind of like, if they can do it, I absolutely can do it. But I was a little bit young as well, and there was kind of the sentiment was, people want to take finance advice off someone who's a bit more experienced and older. So it does help that I look a lot older than I am. I look basically 100, but I'm only 30. So, and at the time it was the same. I probably looked 27 when I was 20. facial hair and wrinkles and a built-in resting bitch face. I got like this constant frown even when I'm happy. I don't know what it is, but so I there was a finance manager in the dealership, great mentor. I used to, in aftermarket, as you're aware, there's a fair bit of downtime waiting between customers and things like that. So I just go in and just offer to help. I didn't like to sit still at all. And in some of the downtime, I would work on the app or whatever tech project I was working on at the time. But sometimes you wanted to get away from looking at a screen, and so you go and talk to someone and sit in the office, the opposite side of the desk. What can I do to help? And I started doing basic admin in the finance department just to help.
Yep.
And then I started asking questions like, how do you do this? And what if they say this? And what about if the customer's in this situation with employment or blah, blah, blah. I started learning. And then he was really keen to kind of have me as like a junior finance manager with him, and he needed some support at the time. Long story short, I ended up in finance. So I moved to a different dealership.
Okay.
Because an opportunity came up, and I started as a junior finance manager, and I was basically training wheels on kind of thing. And then I was a finance manager, and I was given a dealership to look after. It was 5-dock used cars, Phil Gilbert Motor Group. So there's a Toyota dealership and a Hyundai dealership, and then they had a used car section. I was sitting in there doing the finance for those used cars, and then covering the Hyundai dealership. So worked my way up through that, did a really good job, automated a lot of the processes again, worked on tech projects. Then we had this this tool that I didn't build, but I went a long way to optimizing and improving, because we had 3 lenders, and depending on what the client situation was, you'd have to like print 3 forms and like figure out which one to get them to sign. And so I was like, there's a better way, I'll do it. So I built an improved version of the tool. And essentially what it did was present all of the insurance options and coverage options for the client, and their repayment options, whether they wanted a balloon, no balloon, all that type of stuff. So I just made it better. And same thing with logs and reporting. There was no framework. It was just basically a spreadsheet. No data, no charts, no nothing to kind of track how you were going. So I built really good reporting, really good tool, and then we kind of rolled it out across but I went from finance manager or finance broker effectively to senior finance manager to group manager. So senior was looking after the whole 5-dock site. Group was looking after 5-dock and the Lidcombe site. And then I became the state manager of the finance consulting business that I was working for, who looked after the Phil Gilbert account. So then at one point I was looking after 23 business managers in New South Wales, finance managers. And during that time I was training them. So they would send a cadet in, they'd just shadow me for 2 months, 3 months. I'd train them in the downtime. They'd sit in and kind of listen to the conversations and look at the way that I handled objections or answered questions. And then they would go out and kind of
fit into their dealership role.
One of the favorite roles I had in that business was two actually. One was I helped them start their actual finance brokerage. So they were just doing dealer finance at the time, but they started a brokerage and they wanted me to help kind of roll that out in New South Wales. And they kind of had a couple of false starts and things like that. And I just said the best way to do this is to capture all of the deals that get declined across the 10 or 12 dealerships that you have in New South Wales that you look after. There's always like 3, 4, 5 deals that get declined in every dealership. Those lenders can't help.
These are the ones that you need to.
So we started training the brokers up, and that model worked really well. We just started training the business managers up to get accredited with many other lenders. So they'd try the first dealer-focused ones at the beginning. If they were unsuccessful, they'd go to the broker ones. That was one that I really enjoyed, and that's kind of led me to where I am now. That kind of put me on that path. That was the first component. And the other component was going into new dealerships that they would onboard and basically starting from scratch, because they'd send me into a broken dealership. And I mean, really, the process was screwed, underperforming heavily, and I'd be responsible to go in with a fresh set of eyes and set it up, like basically repair the relationship with the sales team, dealer principal, general sales manager, like get all the stakeholders on board with supporting finance and showing them how important it is. And most of the time it was really easy to do.
Yep.
You just be a nice guy and you do everything they ask you to do, because it's a two-way streak, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the time you get finance managers that just want to do what's right for them.
Yeah.
And so they won't compromise on a process.
It's selfishness.
Helps. Yeah, it is. It's 100%.
How's the customer paying? Cash. Oh, I don't want to see him.
Yeah. And so they do that type of stuff, which pisses the salespeople off. It creates resentment. It kind of sends it on this downward spiral. So what I would do is I'd just go in and just give them great service. That was really all I did. I didn't have like a secret thing. I'd also buy them lunch and, cover them if they needed coverage or help them follow up some of their leads when I had downtime. I just showed a lot of initiative and so that built a lot of confidence and credibility in what I was doing. And so then they reciprocated. It was really simple. And of course I had to set up processes from scratch and, show them what works and what doesn't work. And you can't do that unless you've got a track record of doing that. So I just say, I did this. Here's what I did at the other dealership. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't work. And we just kind of improved the model over and over again. But I'm proud because some of those F&I departments we turned around, the finance departments we turned around, ended up leading to those dealerships getting sold for big amounts of money. So I'm proud because I feel like I at least contributed to that somewhat.
Yeah.
And so long story for another day, but that particular business, I left. There was, I guess, a change in leadership, let's call it that. And we didn't see eye to eye in terms of the way that things should be run and business ethics and values. So I got an opportunity to start on a clean blank canvas business called Automotive.
Yep.
And that was a great opportunity because I thought, okay, I can really kind of build this from the ground up. I was employee number one, and within a couple of years we were doing like 160 loans for cars primarily a month. And so we settled, in the time that I was there, we settled like 5,000 loans, like huge numbers.
Yep.
And before I left, about 12 months before I left that business, it was acquired by a listed company. And I got a long-term contract. I was meant to be set up because I was a partner in that business. And so my shareholding diluted as part of this transaction.
Yep.
But I had, an opportunity to stay or go. Like I was at a crossroads at that point. Do I stay?
Yep.
And I really believed in that
what
company and what we were doing. And, I get a lot of sweat equity in that business, blood, sweat and tears, riding the highs and the lows.
Yep.
And then COVID hit. Right. And that's kind of, they wanted to hibernate the business. I didn't agree that was the correct strategy. So I asked, the long story short is I asked for them to remove my non-compete. I could have just sat on the sidelines for 2 or 3 years and got paid. That's what my contract said I was entitled to. But, that's not me, right?
You don't want to be stagnant.
Why would I do that? I mean, I was earning great money. Don't get me wrong. I was earning great money there, probably more than what I'm earning now, to be honest. But I was earning great money, built the team. I literally was employee number one. So every subsequent employee.
Yeah, you've had a hand in hiring.
I've had a hand in hiring, training,
retaining,
managing, whatever. So I felt like that business was mine. That's how I felt. That's how I treated it anyway. I was running it like, even though I was a 20% shareholder, which diluted down to 8%. I felt like it was mine. I treated it like I was 100% owner of that business. And so I gave everything. I had a lot of my identity attached to that business, created new relationships and things like that. They were like, Julian basically is Automotive.
Yeah.
Or, that was kind of association. And then, so COVID hit. I said, I want to do things this way, and we'll kind of just be smart about how we position ourselves, and we'll pivot and we'll focus on business lending because businesses are suffering. And they said no, and we're going to do it this way. I said, okay, well, I'm going to ask that you remove my non-compete and I'll give you back the shares. So I signed them over for $0. For me, what I did there was sign away life-changing money for me for $0. Like for me, I mean, it's speculation, but I estimate that the goodwill in the shares that I had would be, I don't know, $300,000 to $400,000 roughly. For me, that my personal story, right?
Yeah.
That we've just spoken about it, coming from like literally like nothing to this situation where I'm like have a choice where I can either sit on the sidelines and
Get
earn
paid
a lot of money and do nothing,
Yeah.
or I came up with this idea that I'll give them back the shares, because I was just like, we can't stop and just sit on the sidelines and do nothing. So they agreed, and I was very grateful, and we left on amicable terms. And so never speak bad about former employers or things like that. It was just not a good fit given the COVID situation. Other than that, it was
everything else was great.
It was
right?
it was I really bought into what they sold. But yeah, it wasn't to be. I started loan options then, and I made sure that I did a proper handover. I was fully transparent with which partners were like basically not going to ever deal with anybody but me. So I did my best to manage that process, because you can imagine I was the first employee, so every subsequent partner or affiliate or source of business was associated with me in some way, shape, or form.
Yep.
And so a lot of it, I just said, they're yours. I'm not going to touch them. But there were some like people that were just ride or die Julian, right? So I told them, I gave them the list and said, these are the ones that are at risk. And I said, you're more than welcome to like go
Talk
after them, but I'm just letting you know that they're definitely at risk.
Yeah.
So I started loan options. August 1st was the official launch date. My last day at Automotive was 21st of July, 2020. So yeah, and kind of fast forward a couple of years, we're doing pretty good. We're probably at the level now where Automotive was. So it's basically set me back a couple of years. But I just think now I am the sole decision maker, really.
That's right.
So I've taken it in a different direction where it's more about the customer. So I've learned a lot, and I'm grateful for the opportunities that I had at Automotive, because certainly learned a lot about business. It opened doors for me, but also just professionally, I did a lot of like personal growth in that business.
I think that's one of the, it's a great point that you make in terms of those personal relationships. I feel like, too often people go into a role and they go, they ask the what's in it for me question, right? Yeah. And so then all they offer is the bare minimum, right? Yep. They do enough so that they can make a good living and get by, but they don't think about, how do I deliver exceptional service? How do I deliver exceptional value? And when you don't focus on exceptional service or exceptional value, you don't build exceptional relationships. Yeah. You don't build relationships. You have transactional relationships.
Yeah, that's it.
That are purely, just about this one transaction or blah, blah, blah. And so, I feel like there's a lot of parallels between, your journey and my journey in the automotive industry. I did the work and study thing, and I had a great DP at the time who was, Mark Fitzgerald. I always, am very grateful to him, because when I started at his business, it was actually like I'd come back from like a summer holiday type of thing. Like I went back to Singapore for 3 months, and where my dad was from, and lived with my grandma and his eldest sister, and lived there, and I guess, got to experience life a little bit different. Like I got out of Sydney for a bit. And when I came back, I was looking for work for much the same reasons as you, in the sense of I needed to be self-sufficient. Yep. Wasn't as fortunate to start in sales. I started at the very bottom in as an apprentice, apprentice mechanic, and ate shit for 3 odd years. Getting paid. So my first year, I think I was getting $4 or something an hour.
Yeah, wow.
And everybody always, every mechanic that you talk to, depending on what generation you are.
My brother went through that as well.
Yeah,
he was getting like $220 a week or something like that. Full week's work. Yeah. And I'm talking, that is a hard job. Yeah. Man, that is a hard job.
Yeah, and so like, back then it's like when you start as an apprentice, I'm making $4 an hour. Like the mechanics would be like, oh mate, when I was an apprentice, I was making $2 an hour. Like it's just the further back you go, the worse it gets. Yeah. But at the same time,
they're really struggling to get people in that job. It's a hard job, and that's not enough pay, right? That's not. How can you, with the way things are?
Yeah.
How can you afford to work full time and get? Maybe it's gone up now. Maybe
it is higher than that.
Maybe
now.
it's $350
Yeah.
a week.
But
I mean, who knows, right?
But you also got to look at it from the. I think there's two things you got to consider. You got to consider the what's on the line, right? If you're an apprentice and you're working on a car and you fuck it up, you don't put a wheel on properly. That's somebody's family.
Yes.
That could be your mother, your sister. Like, and that's one of the things that for me, when I was when I used to have people come through and do tours so that people can understand what are the jobs available in the automotive industry. I used to do a lot of that for youth and schools and things like that. I would always explain to anybody that was interested in working on cars, like, guys, there's a real responsibility here. It's not just all fun and play. You need to make sure that your work is double checked, triple checked, because when that car goes out that door, you imagine that your mum's driving that car and the wheel comes off when she's driving down the freeway at 80 or 100 k's an hour. That's no joke, right? And so there's this, for what you're getting paid, it almost doesn't compute, does it? Right?
No, it doesn't.
It
doesn't.
As an, like, when I was an apprentice, $4 an hour, and here I am responsible for somebody's safety, somebody's well-being, right? I don't look after this car correctly and something goes wrong, even though it's the business's liability, how could I live with myself? And that's what I would always stress to prospective employees, that, hey, don't look at it from that perspective. You actually have one of the most important jobs in the world, right? Because if you fail to make sure that this car is safe, then that's somebody's family, that's somebody's life. That could be your family, your parents, whatever the case may be. Yeah. So, I think that's one consideration for anybody looking to get into the automotive field. And I think the second thing is that when you compare that to other apprenticeships that are available, so most of the time, if you're a plumber, electrician, you name it, at the end of it, most of those people then go and usually start their own businesses. Yeah. So it's a little bit different for mechanics, because a lot of the times they don't. Yes, there will be some that want to go out and start their own business and do all that. But for a large proportion of mechanics, like, there are guys who just want to work on cars, which is fantastic, because you need those people, right? Yeah. They become the core.
Well, that's what I found. A lot of the mechanics, or the people that kind of went into that career, were really nuts about cars. So the pay wasn't.
It's not everything.
It wasn't everything. It was like, no, this is what I want to do. This is what I love doing.
Yeah.
And I do it for free in my own backyard. It was like, that was my brother, right? Yeah. It was like, that was kind of him. He was like, I'd do this for free.
Yeah.
It's just a privilege that I get to get paid for it.
Yeah.
But I think that's how they went into it.
Yeah.
And then you ask him 5 years later. Actually, he probably did it for 10 years. And now he's started his own business. He's got a concrete truck that he operates, a concrete pumping truck. But yeah, I mean, he eventually became a foreman, and things got easier.
Yeah.
But then you're worried about kind of looking after more people. But yeah, that journey from first year apprentice, where you, like you said, you're just eating shit.
Yeah, like
you basically just pass me this tool, do that, carry this heavy object.
Yeah,
you're kind of busting your
It probably didn't help that Mark was very complimentary about me as well. Like, because before I even started at the dealership, there was this sort of like, oh, here's this whiz kid who's studying at uni and he's coming to work as an apprentice mechanic, and so he sort of set me up, right? Like, so the foreman at the time probably didn't like me very much, because Mark had given me leave to go and do my studies.
Yeah.
Right. So some depending on the semester, sometimes I would have to leave early. But what actually happened over time was that I then, I think after my first year, I tried to structure as many of my classes in the evening as possible. So then that way it would be like I'd work a full day, then jump on at the time I was riding a motorbike. So then I used to jump on the motorbike, ride to the city in peak hour, park the bike at UTS and then go do my classes and things like that. And then I got to the point where I was like, I just attended uni less. Yeah. But I was very fortunate that, whether it was luck or whatever, I managed to pass, most of my subjects without having the best attendance rate. But it was a very challenging time in my life, because I was studying full time, I was working full time, I was at TAFE 1 day a week, having to tick that box off for the apprenticeship as well. And but once I got through it, it sort of opened up a whole bunch of different doors that I didn't expect. And why I'm always grateful to Mark is because he actually got me a job at Toyota Motor Corporation after that. He said, Johnny, I'm happy to keep you. We can put you on a dealership pathway, blah, 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 blah. And he said, but why don't you go and try and work for TMCA and see where that leads you? And so he introduced me to the right people. And, I got a job at Toyota, worked there for 5 years and then, kept on. Now I wanted to go back into the dealership pathway. So that's why I came back out.
Yeah, yeah.
But, a lot of the times the relationships that you're building. And for me, you know, I would say when I had the opposite problem to you. You know, I look young, and I probably look younger than I look, right? And so when I first became a DP, it was interesting from that perspective because, a lot of my managers were older than me.
Yeah.
Right. So I've got the reverse sort of problem. But it didn't really ever end up being a problem because I think the thing that I always had on my side was competency. Yeah. So it was like, you know, irrespective of age, like I always think of the meritocracy, right? Like,
that's right.
If you know what you're doing, you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And people can't discount that. You know, I'd have the occasion where a customer would look at me and go, "Oh, what, you're the general manager, you're the DP?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then after dealing with me, then they'd realize, oh, okay, there's a reason why you're in that role, right? And then they'd start to understand.
That would have been something that you would have struggled with, right? Because I know for me, even now, like I'm 30 and I look at least 35, often I still get underestimated. Like, and it's people that know me, they still underestimate me. And it's like, you know, maybe it's a life experience thing that they don't think I have, or maybe they just don't know my story or know who I really am. Yeah. But I often find that people will either, and it's less, it used to be really bad. If I was in a boardroom with DPs or things like that, I would almost start off on the back foot because they're like, oh, who's this kid? You know, at that point in time, I was 23. I was a state manager looking after 22 other business managers. Yep. And I'd be in a boardroom with dealer principals and general managers that were middle-aged men, right? Like, so I would start off on the back foot, but then I'd be prepared for the meeting. I'd show them, you know, here are the numbers, and here's what we're looking at doing, and here's where we can improve, and here's what we need from you, and here's what we want to do for you. And it would take almost like 20 minutes of the 1 hour meeting for them to warm and go, actually, this guy's
knows what he's talking about. Yeah. No, and that's the thing. You have to overcompensate by being good at what you do. You know, showing that you actually know the data, you know your stuff inside and out. Because, you know, and that's why it goes back to, if you just have confidence but no competence, right, then people will blow you off and they go, oh, you know, you're just arrogant. Yeah. Right?
You're full of shit.
Yeah, you're full of shit. You don't know what you're talking about, right? But then if your confidence comes from the competence that you know what you're doing, I think that exudes a different kind of aura. Yep. And people pick up on that vibe and they test you. Like, they'll ask you questions that are challenging, you know, that are meant to try and stump you. But if you show that, you know the answers to that question, or you have really thought about the problem, that then propels you to a new level where people they look at you and they go, oh, you know, no, he actually knows what he's talking about. Yeah. You know, I think for me, there was the first time I became a DP was the hardest, because it's just like, you know, becoming a parent. Nobody gives you the handbook and says this is how you become a parent. You know, when you become a manager, you've been an employee for so long, you don't necessarily know how to be a good manager, because the skill set is very different. You can be competent at your job, right?
Yeah, but the problem is being able to think big picture and how this aspect impacts another department.
Yeah. And how do you get somebody else to do their job? Yeah. Right, with the same level of competence. And so that was one of the traps that I fell into, is because I'm so good at what I do, you hold everybody to the same regard, but then they might not be as invested as you, right? And so for me, I always treated every single business that I was in as if it was my own, right? So exactly same mentality as what you're saying. And for some people, it's just a job to them, right? And then they go, oh, you know, why are you taking it so seriously? It's like, well, no, this is my life, right? Like you're so entwined with what you do that it becomes a big part of who you are. So, you know, for me, there was a big learning there in terms of how do I get the most out of people. And, you know, I think in anything, right, if you're not growing, you're just slowly dying, right? If you're stagnant, if your business is stagnant, if your martial arts is stagnant, if it's stagnant, it's just slowly dying. You have to be always sort of propelling yourself. And so, you know, I reckon I had definitely had the arrogance and the cockiness factor, you know, when I became a DP, because I got there 4 years before I expected I would, you know.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, like it was...
If you don't, like, for those who are listening, like the dealer principal, to actually reach that point in a dealership, it's really hard. The amount of shit you have to fucking go through. Yeah. There's a lot of obstacles, a lot of like internal politics that needs to be played, a lot of bureaucracy. You know, there's some dealerships don't do it like that, and it's meritocracy. And I think you have more of, like Johnny, you would have more of a chance in that type of environment because you're genuinely competent at what you do. Yeah. But I think as well, if you end up in the wrong dealership and you're trying to get to that point, I think it's really, really hard.
Well,
it's almost impossible if you're a female. So,
everything is political.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like even in corporate company structures, there's politics because people are looking and trying to serve what's best for them. They're looking at their own interests.
That's why you look at Edwina and Simone Gilbert, and you see how sharp those women are.
Yeah.
You're just so impressed. You just go, like, at this point in time, you don't even say they're a woman DP. They're just a DP.
Yeah.
Like they're so competent, so sharp. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And they're great leaders too. They really put people first. So that's kind of my perception when you see people that reach that point.
Yeah.
He's like, okay.
Yeah. Well, so that was I think the tipping point for me was when I first got to that level, it was like my management style. So I always talk about this. I think there's three things that influences a person's management style. And they might sound negative at the start, but it's like fear, ego, and control, right? So there's a manager that's always fearful that somebody's going to take their job. So they don't want to share any knowledge, right? Then there's the ego person where it's all about me, me, me. Everything that they do is all about them
they want to
and
take
their
all the
accolades,
credit.
take all the credit, right? And then the controlling manager is the one that micromanages his or her people, right? So you're trying to focus on, because you're so competent, you go, okay, you're not doing it to the same level that I would do it. You need to do it like this, right? And you overmanage your people as a result of it.
Yep.
Everyone, when they first become a manager, falls into one of these three traps, right? And then, so for me, it was definitely the ego and definitely the controlling part because I would look at, my level of competency was high. So I'd expect people to operate to the same level of competency. And then the ego thing, being young, I wanted to prove myself. And that means that you automatically fall into the trap when you're trying to prove a point about who you are. You're focused on you. You're not focused on your people, right? But the key to being a great manager, in my eyes, is being focused on your people because it's through the success of your people that then you get the accolades and people will talk about how good you are as a manager and this and that and all that sort of thing. So I feel like, that was something that I only learnt after reflecting on my first opportunity as a DP. And it wasn't to say that the business was bad. It was a tough business because I was in a Holden dealership. Being Asian in a Holden dealership, you don't sell many Holdens to your friends and family. Let's be honest, right? So,
if you're in Honda, maybe
if you're in Honda, Toyota, like if you're in a mainstream brand that resonates with Asian people, but Holdens definitely were not my bread and butter. Like I remember I had this interaction with a customer where, I had a great interaction over the phone and the customer comes in and it was a older white guy. And he comes into the reception desk. He goes, I'm looking for Johnny. And I was expecting him. So I was already at the reception desk to greet him. And he goes, yes, that's me. And he goes, you're not Johnny. And I was sort of looking at him and he's like, you're definitely not Johnny. Like the Johnny I spoke to is an Aussie, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. Because on the phone, you don't know what the person looks like.
Yeah, you sound pretty Aussie.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so that was, I was on the back foot from that perspective. And then at the same time, Holden was a brand that was 25% market share, but here we were 12% and sliding, and only a few years later, Holden would turn it in and they're no longer in the country. So a very tough opportunity from that perspective. But I learnt so much in that opportunity because here I was in a greenfield site, I was operating out of a temporary facility. So it used to be the old Bridgestone at on Castle Hill on Victoria Avenue. We were operating out of that to begin with while the dealership was being built.
Yeah.
Right. And, it was a great learning experience because we out of that little facility, we started making money in that little facility, but then it was like, okay, you're moving into the big joint now and now your overheads shoot up.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh shit, here we go again. So then you have to claw your way back up and now you got to, build this business up so that you can make up the dollars to claw back or to cover your expenses in this new facility. And we got there, but after 4 years of doing that, I was spent. I was like, here I am putting all my heart and soul into this business and it's like all you can do is make a small profit. Like that was it. Like it just didn't seem like the reward was there.
Yeah,
right?
It's rough.
Yeah. And
especially new cars, right? New cars, like people don't know this. Like the margins are so small.
Yeah.
The margins are so small that you basically most new car departments operating at a loss.
Yeah.
So they can, and then it's finance and the service departments that actually make money. And now it's not even finance.
Yeah.
Now it's primarily service and used cars that are.
Well, yeah, even that's going to be difficult as we go into the future. you've got yourself a couple of Teslas, right? So, servicing wise, you don't have to change oil in those.
No, that's
right.
right.
Like the service intervals are
brakes and tires. That's it.
It's brakes and tires.
There literally is no service on them. It's just brakes and tires.
Yep.
Or if something goes wrong, you take it to the...
Yeah. So, I think that's interesting for the industry, and it's also exciting from that perspective because, I think the good operators will always find ways to pivot to make sure that the model stays profitable. Because at the end of the day, if you are offering a good quality service, and same thing, in your business, if you're focused on the customer and the customer is getting the value out of seeing you and what your team can do, they'll keep coming back.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So I guess, just reflecting in terms of the similarities in terms of our career pathways, we both went on this journey of getting right into the thick of the automotive industry. I guess what I'm curious for you is, obviously in the loan option side of things, you've done a lot of work with the tech side of things to sort of amalgamate the two.
Yeah, so that's kind of that was like, for me, that was it's my own business. So like, what do I actually want to do? And you get to reflect a little bit about when kind of one door closes, what you want the next door to be, if you ever get that opportunity. And so for me, I was like already working on the concept in the previous business, and I was trying to get that business to kind of fund the project, and they'd agreed to fund the project, but then COVID hit, and kind of, so I was like, okay, I'm going to start this project and do it myself and build it myself. And then I kind of met with my current business partners, Simon and Grant, because I was going to use a software platform like a CRM that they'd built, and I was going to overlay the loan options technology on top of that. And that kind of ended up being a longer discussion. And then we kind of had a discussion about equity, and they wanted to kind of get involved in what I was doing because it was pretty exciting. And that's kind of how that journey started. But it was, for me, it's like the perfect blend of finance and technology. It's something that I actually really love doing.
Yeah.
So it's easy for me to get. I don't have this kind of Monday-itis thing. I'm working like every day, even if I'm not in the office. I'm working, responding to emails, calls, setting up meetings, doing this, doing that. And like I said, it's just it's actually a dream come true. I get to do the two things that I love doing. I really love finance. I love disrupting that space because it's come from only recently being a pen and paper
based industry.
Role.
Yeah.
Like I can swear to you, 2016, 2017, we still had to send faxes into ANZ Bank to settle a loan.
Yeah.
Faxes. This is even 2018. And actually, come to think of it, you probably still have to do that with ANZ. Like, they haven't changed their system. So, I mean, I haven't used them in a while because they're kind of, they're not that popular anymore. They've changed their products and pulled out of certain markets.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that's so recent. Fax machine.
Yeah.
St. George is the same. St. George Automotive Finance. And they've sold now to Angle Finance, Angle Auto Finance. But it's crazy. You're sending them faxes, and a lot of it's pen and paper stuff.
Yeah.
It just blows your mind.
It's because they've with a lot of these institutions, it's been bolt on after bolt on after bolt on. Yes. And it goes back to that, like when I was at Toyota and I used to have to build spreadsheets and things like that. A lot of the times sometimes it was easier to just wipe the slate and start again.
Yeah.
Organize the data the way that you want to have the data, right? Organize the macros and all that sort of stuff, and record the macros that you want to have to run the spreadsheets, and write the code and the VB to sort of make it all work the way that you wanted, rather than trying to unpick somebody else's work.
Yeah.
Right? You get handed over, this file. I'm sure people probably felt the same way about the stuff that I built. I would have built things that, once I moved out of that role, somebody else has moved into that role. They've now got to facilitate it and was like, oh, this is too hard, or they don't understand the process because they didn't go through the process of building it. So, and then with those finance companies, absolutely, it's just bolt on after bolt on, and to go and rebuild it all, it's like, oh, we don't want to do that. Too much cost.
Yeah.
Too much time. We'll just keep going with the status quo until a disruptor like yourself comes into the marketplace and they go, hey, there should be a better way of doing this.
Yeah, and that's kind of how it started. Like I was in Auto Approve. Eventually, I was the first employee, but then eventually I had a team, and they would come to me on every transaction and go, hey, I think it's this lender. Can you just run your eyes over it? And I'd look at it and go, yeah, you've got it right. Or actually, no, try this lender. I know it's outside guidelines, but there's this mitigating circumstance. I think this lender will do it and the client will get a better deal.
Mm.
And then it got to a point where that was happening. Like that was like my entire day is just taking phone calls. And I remember at one point, this is the point where I actually decided that I need to do something about it. Most people in that position would, I guess, use that kind of that reliance on you as a point of leverage to get more money or, you know, kind of show their worth or their value. I didn't use it as a tool. What I did was, how can I automate myself out of this job?
Yeah.
Like, so there was a point where in the iPhone, if you get 150 calls in a day, your call log can't fit anymore. So I got to like 3 o'clock and I went to call someone back that I'd tried to call earlier in the day, that I'd spoken to earlier in the day. And I was scrolling up and my call log only went up to like 11 something. Yeah. And I was like, oh, like, how am I going to get this number? Like, because I didn't have it saved. Anyway, so I ended up, but that was the point. I was like in the space of 3 or 4 hours, I'd received 150 or like received or missed or made 150 calls. And I was just like, okay, this is insane. So I need to do something about that. So I started writing down every time I made a transaction, every time I made an assumption or something on where a deal should go, I wrote down the logic that I used in my head. And so I kept writing that down, And then I started like, okay, I'm not going to write it. I'm just going to put it in a spreadsheet. So I just started jotting down everything that I was doing in my head.
Yeah, the criteria that you were thinking.
Because the client's employment is full-time and greater than 3 months, then here's what can apply. If the employment's casual and less than 3 months, then rule out these lenders. And so all of the stuff that was going on in my head, I just wrote down, and it eventually became a spreadsheet tool. And then I started going, okay, well, I can build something here that can like auto-qualify or disqualify a customer so that we can do it faster and so that I can give it to the rest of the team for them to use. And it started with just basic knockouts, things that, you know, would automatically disqualify a customer. Really simple. If it hits this particular point, no.
Don't worry about it.
And move on to the next one and just let them down lightly. And I started doing that. And then I started going, okay, well, we have this many lenders, so I need to kind of account for that many lenders. And each lender has different criteria that would qualify or disqualify a customer. So I wrote down every possible variation that a lender would consider. And then it became like X axis and Y axis, like one with the lender and one with the criteria.
So a matrix.
Became a matrix. That's what it was. So it became a matrix that had like an input field. And it was essentially a tool that we use to workshop clients' applications. And so that's kind of the concept of how Loan Options was born, of like what it would do is it would qualify or disqualify a customer. And then let's say there's out of 30 or more lenders, as an example, they qualified for 5. It would then tell you using like a heat map which one was the cheapest for the customer. And just all in Excel. That was kind of how it started. And then we kind of eventually started building it with Loan Options. We built it into a tool with the help of Drive IQ and Simon and Grant, my partners. So that's, and it's not even final state yet. We've got some cool stuff that we're working on, but the reality is it went from being a spreadsheet to a system, and then we had all this data, and we're like, okay, what can we do with it to make it more accurate? And then that's the AI component. So we feed it like all these different scenarios, and then now it's got so much data that it can see, based on a similar scenario, you're 86% likely to get approved with this particular lender.
Wow.
So I actually thought AI was going to completely replace the logic. I was wrong about that. Happy to admit that.
And why is that? Why can't it replace the logic altogether?
Not yet.
Okay.
So
but it will get. You reckon it'll get to that point?
I think so. I think so. But there's some key things that logic has some pros and some cons. And then AI has some pros and cons. So I'll start with the AI cons. Let's just start there. So lenders change their credit criteria quite frequently. And so AI relies on historical data. And so let's say I'll use one of the lenders, Wiser. They're a fintech company, a fintech lending business, and they changed their credit policy to support borrowers who it was if you're not casually employed, you need to be 9 months in your job for them to say yes. And they changed it from 9 months to 4 months. And then so the AI algorithm
still working off 9 months.
Still working off 9 months. And because all the historical deals
were based on 9 months.
So anytime it was less than 9 months, it wasn't showing wiser with a lot of certainty. And so we're like, okay, yeah, that was kind of the first moment I discovered that it wasn't going to be okay by itself. And so with the logic, you just go in and change the criteria and go from 9 to 4, and then it works instantly. But logic also isn't great because and has its flaws because with logic, it's very black and white. So whatever you set that parameter is, let's say it's 4 months. Okay, if it's 3 months and 15 days, it's going to show no. And you can build in tolerances that give you different answers, right? Like if it's 3 months, then flag it as yellow, not red or green, as an example. But at a certain point in time, that's not going to work because sometimes it's like 4 things that are borderline, not just one, and it's conditional based on all those 4 things, or 15 things or 20 data points. So AI is really good because it can capture that kind of peripheral outside the box deals and go, yeah, actually, even though it's outside criteria, it's still 86 based on historical deals, 86% chance that this lender will say yes. So yeah, pros and cons.
Okay.
That's kind of,
Yeah. All right. Let's pivot a little bit. I think it's probably worthwhile for us to sort of debrief on the whole political thing. You know, I don't think I've really shared. I shared a little bit of what I thought. You know, with Rob Fletcher. So he was our candidate for Bradfield, and you were obviously the candidate for Parramatta. I guess, you know, when you sort of debriefed and reflected for yourself, you know, what were the pros and cons of having gone through that whole process for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll start by saying that, you know, I certainly don't regret any of it. I felt like that was the only option that I had at that point in time. You know, Western Sydney got hammered in the lockdowns and you know, I guess the chaos of the last 2 years. We always seemed to be on the worst end of the stick when it came to, you know, not being able to leave your house and some stuff that I was particularly subject to, you know, like I was coming back from a park once and a police car pulled up on the gutter, like literally almost hit me, and was like, what are you doing out of your house and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, I'm just coming back from the park, you know, and they're like, oh, you're more than 5 meters, you're closer than 5 meters next to, and I was next to my brother-in-law and I was pushing a pram. Like it was just crazy. It was just absolute nonsense. So I felt like I didn't have a choice and I needed to do that. But the reason I felt like that is because a lot of my clients are small businesses and I was getting phone calls during the lockdown, particularly the second one where it was just like so draconian. And these businesses were, you know, these business owners were calling me saying, you know, I can't pay my rent and, you know, I can't pay my staff. And it was really, really heartbreaking. A lot of these people I admired from a business sense, like people I respect, they, you know, operate great businesses, long-standing clients of mine, and some of them were crying on the phone. And I've told this story before. It's not new, but it was really confronting because at that point in time, I was running loan options and we were growing. And, you know, we can work from home. Like I'm fortunate, you know, I'm kind of part of this, what they call like a laptop class. I can work from anywhere in the world. I don't need to be in the office. All of our systems are cloud-based and, you know, it's kind of, I can work from anywhere. I can work from my phone, laptop, desktop computer, whatever. And I felt like I had a moral obligation to do something or say something. And so I started doing the normal channels. Like I wrote to MPs, I wrote an open letter to Dom Perrottet when he took over from Gladys. And I did what I could. I spoke out on LinkedIn, which was the only public
forum that you were involved with
that I had. And I had a reasonable following. And I seemed to be on LinkedIn going against the grain. Some people saw it that way. Some people said that I was just speaking common sense, and none of them were radical ideas. I just, you know, when the nurses got fired, I'm like, are we really in a situation where we're saying we have nurse shortages, and at the same time we're letting people off? And it was the same people that kind of posted that. It's actually one of the posts that did the best. And even Dr. Robert Malone commented on it.
Oh, wow.
Just sent it into orbit when he did that. But there was a photo of the nurses being saluted by the Avengers, the Marvel characters, right? They were all kind of in the hallway of a hospital, and they were bowing to the nurses doctors walking through the hallway of the, and I reposted that, and I was like, remember this photo? Remember in 2020?
Yeah, these were the heroes.
These were the heroes, and we expected them to work
24/7.
24/7, go, without any protection of a vaccine or anything like that. And now the vaccine's available. Some of them are saying they don't want it. It's their choice. It should be their choice. But now we're saying that they can't work.
Yep.
And so to me, that was like, what is going on here? And, like they were throwing all sorts of titles, anti this, pro that, whatever. Like to me, I didn't really get affected by any of that. I just thought I'll make the right decisions for me and my family. And, that was kind of where it is. But so I decided to put my hand up and, didn't go as I would hoped. I would have loved to kind of win or, of course that was the goal, right? And we thought we had a chance. And I met some great people, yourself included. We had some great meetings in our office and catching up over pizza and sharing ideas on what's working and what's not working. But it's like, going back to my thoughts earlier in this chat, it was like always be a white belt in something. I've no business being in politics. I've got a successful businesses actually. I've got 2 young kids, a family. I everybody who knows me asks like, how do you fit this in?
Yeah.
And it's for most people, it's physically there's not enough hours in the day.
Yeah.
But I thought it was necessary, and I still feel very similarly about that, despite the outcome, because it's easy to go, no, once you've lost or you didn't win. And some people said you never had a chance, but I disagree with that concept because, there's some kind of pathway to victory, at least in the booth that I stood in on the election day. Yeah. There was, it still wasn't a victory, but I nearly won that booth. And that was the pathway that I'd mapped out in my head where it was possible for me to win. And then I was going to use that platform to make sure that Western Sydney got better representation. That was how I saw it. I didn't know that I was going to meet great people. I didn't know what to expect. I literally have zero experience in that, that environment. So, we obviously, some great candidates, some average ones, let's say that. And the whole process was interesting, learning about the system and, the importance of having solid policies and not being a kind of a one issue party and that type of thing. But to me, I was attracted because they seemed to be the only ones that were advocating for alternatives, like not locking down healthy people, but actually, taking precautions for the vulnerable, the sick, the unhealthy, and looking at alternative treatments. So I felt that was the only party, and I've voted for just about, in terms of the 2 major parties, I voted for both at some point in my life. So, growing up, working class was like Labor, kind of thing. And then, as you kind of become a small business owner, you understand the importance of voting for Liberals. And they kind of both let us down in reality. They both had terrible stints. And so I thought this was a viable alternative with, funding. So I didn't need to go to someone and ask for money, especially in my community where people had already done it so tough. Yeah. I didn't want to be in a position where I was asking
for political donations.
For donations for people who've at some point in time didn't know if they were going to have food on the table for their family. So reflecting on it, took a lot out of me. But I came out of that whole situation really, really grateful for everything that I have. And it put me in like this razor sharp focus on what I need to do next. And really what that is like focusing on my business and the people in my business, and making sure that I deliver and meet all the goals that I have in this business. And separate to that, just making sure that I'm kind of there for my family. You know, they were all there for me, despite, you know, literally I would wake up like 5 a.m. I'd go to train stations, you know, go and hand out flyers and do that kind of thing. And then I'd come into the office after that was done, and I'd work until 6 o'clock. And then sometimes I'd go to shopping centers after that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was working at least 14 to 16 hours a day every single day.
Yeah.
And so that takes a lot out of you.
Yeah.
I was only sleeping 4 hours maximum every night. Like that was the best night's sleep I got in that kind of 3-month period.
Yeah.
And when it was pre-poll, it was probably less than that because I was at pre-polling for 2 weeks.
Yep.
And that was really the only time I spent out of the office.
Yep.
2 weeks, I just wasn't here, with the exception of once or twice.
Yeah.
So I was probably sleeping 3 hours maximum during pre-poll, sometimes less. Sometimes it was crazy. 'Cause I didn't have like a huge team, right? I had a good solid supporter base and volunteer group, but they would come in like after it's all set up or whatever, you know. So I was always the first one there, last one to leave, packing up all the signs.
That's right.
But
the experience is something that, you know, nothing else gives you that same level of experience other than doing it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
And that's
I learned so much, man.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
You get to experience like the real gambit of all the emotions. You also get to experience a really wide breadth of people.
Yeah.
And, you know, I find it interesting. It's like everybody's, you know, whether it's positive or negative, people are happy to tell you their opinion, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's one of those things that unless you've gone through it, you can't really comment on it. You know, it's almost like how, you know, the casuals like to talk about people who fight. Yeah. You know, and if their favorite person loses or they had a bet on them and they go, oh, and he lost, or he's now the shittest person in the world, or you should have done this, you should have done that. But unless you're the person that was in the cage, right? You don't know. The man in the arena. You don't know what the experience was like. Yeah. You know, and that was one of the things that I took away from it. Like, to get that sort of, you know, and Clive, love him or hate him, you know, people hate him obviously, and there are people that love him, but to be able to listen to him and understand how his mind works, I think that was invaluable insight. Like, at the end of the day, the guy is successful, whether you think that he's good or a bad businessman or whatever. You know, you're gaining perspective, right?
Yeah.
To listen, you know, and Craig Kelly, same thing. People love him or hate him. Some people say he's a peddler of misinformation. Other people say he's telling the truth.
Yeah.
But at least you get to hear it straight from him, and you get to see what kind of a person he is.
Yeah.
Having spent time with him, you know. Likewise, even with our candidates, like there are people that, you know, I would have met otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? I think probably me and you is a good example of that. We may not have, even though we're in the same industry.
Yep.
We may literally have never crossed paths unless we kind of got here, and it's just amazing to see all the different political ideologies kind of and how they operate, and see some of the tactics that were used and things like that. I literally watch a sitting MP now lie to someone's face to win one vote.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Like, my thought behind that is, like, can you imagine what they're prepared to do to win many votes?
That's right.
And so to me, it really opened my eyes about just how filthy the political game really is.
Yep.
And I don't know that nice guys can participate in that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
I feel like, you know, and this goes to, I guess, how majority of people are conditioned, is that you need the party machine behind you.
Yeah.
Right. But then to be involved in that party machine, what do you need to do?
Oh, I would say you need to be at the bare minimum morally very flexible. That's the best way of putting it, right?
I think that's a great way to put it. You know, if you're morally flexible, and you need to probably need to compromise on some of your values. And I think one of the things that I enjoyed about you know, the candidates that we had was a lot of the people seemed quite strong in their beliefs. You know, we had conviction in terms of what we thought.
Yep.
And I think, you know, from a policy standpoint, and also from a what's the right word? Like, you know, thinking about the future in terms of, look at the crystal ball, what's going to happen in the Australian economy. We were definitely right about interest rates, right? Like that's just one example.
Yeah.
There are things that we're wrong about, and I'm happy to say, hey, at the moment, it seems like, restrictions are being lifted. Fantastic. And I'm glad to say that, if provided things don't go worse and it looks like we're heading in the right direction, right?
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I'm happy to be wrong on that.
Yeah.
I'm happy to go and say, hey, okay, maybe we were a bit doomsday in terms of restrictions and things like that. It still doesn't make right all the things that have happened, but at least it's heading in a better direction than what it was.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
and so
that's right. And look, all we wanted was to get, what we thought was our country back, like the freedoms that we had in 2019 versus 2020 and 2021. It's just night and day.
Yeah.
And, just being told that, this many people are allowed in your business, or you have to have this kind of certificate to go here and that, like that was just so crazy. It's such a foreign concept to me.
Yeah.
And, one thing I learned absolutely for certain is just how powerful media really is. Me personally, I don't watch TV with the exception of sport or the occasional Netflix show. Game of Thrones as well on Foxtel or whatever. Like I don't watch TV. I don't listen to the Channel 7, 6 o'clock update or whatever. Like I don't do that. Most of the news I get is from accounts that I follow that, might be, let's say, for example, I want to see what the latest is with MMA or jiu-jitsu. I'm following accounts that are very specific to that niche.
Yep.
And so the information I get is usually hyper accurate. It's not like some mainstream media coverage that's giving me like a brushstroke of like what's going on. So for me, I thought like everyone's like me. Everyone, no one's watching. I'm like, who's watching Channel 7 these days?
Yeah.
But I couldn't believe how many people still just watch like the mainstream media, whether it's Channel 7 or whatever, like Channel 9, Channel 10. And that's kind of where they get their information from. That to me was super eye-opening.
Yeah.
Like I haven't watched TV for as long as I can remember.
Yeah. But it made for some great discussions, didn't it? Like, whether you agree or you disagree with somebody, I think the best discussions were generally, when you could approach it from the angle of let's just talk about the ideas, right?
Yes.
And then, what do those ideas mean? And yes, for a lot of people, it's like, well, that's out of my control.
Yeah.
But if you could have an influence over it, what do you think? There's one last thing I just want to touch on. And I know, we're almost at the time, but like I think
I'm good for time. I was just getting notifications that I think my Do Not Disturb didn't work properly.
That's all right. But yeah, like I think just going back to the dirtiness of politics, there was obviously, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but like there was a situation even with your work where your work was targeted, right?
Yeah. Let's leave that.
Okay.
Look, it happened a few times, but people try and look into you and find dirt. And if you're a guy like me who has never taken any drugs, never posted stupid photos on the internet, has private social media accounts, barely drinks, and is faithful to his wife and has always been faithful to his wife, there's no dirt you can find on me.
Yeah.
So the next best thing is to try and ruin my life, right? And the people in my business. So one thing that happened was there was a gentleman on LinkedIn that went and started posting fake reviews on my business account. Like we've got perfect 5-star reviews and we're really big on service and making sure that people feel like they're looked after when they deal with us. So he did that hurt quite a lot because I was like, okay, this is going to happen. And so that was one aspect. Thankfully, we were able to provide proof to Google that this guy's not actually a client.
Custom, yeah.
And I threatened him with legal action. So made stuff like that go away. But there's all sorts of stuff that was either attempted or they successfully did. And so that to me was dirty. There was some of the other dirty tactics. Obviously, like my mum would help me at pre-polls and my brothers, and they would try and agitate because there was like the one thing that you can get under my skin. I'm obviously very protective. I've spoken about my family bond. people know that, and it's a weakness because that's just how you can get under my skin. And that's why I banned my wife from coming. I was like, there's no way, because like I'm
super protective.
Wait.
But I think
and I did ban my brothers and my mum, but they just turned up, and so for me, when they, some of the Greens volunteers and even some of the Labor volunteers, would try and pick at my mum and say things to her about me or about her, and got very heated a couple of times and almost physical altercation. But that just shows what type of people they are, really, in terms of their values. And
it's not a reflection of you; it's a reflection of other people.
Yeah.
I always think, if you hold yourself accountable to what your core values are. So for me, it's always been. So I wouldn't say it's always been, but especially over the last 5, 6, 7 years, it's always been transparency.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So everything that you could possibly think of, I've probably aired on a podcast of some sort.
Yeah.
Just go through the back catalogue and start listening from number one, and good luck to you, because if you're an avid follower of me and you've listened to 2 hours of me speaking with someone for the last 60 something, nearly 70 odd episodes, well, congratulations to you. You probably feel like I'm your best friend, like, because you know so much about me.
Yeah.
And it's just one of those things. But like, I feel like if I can't be transparent in terms of who I am, then it means that you're running from something, right? And I think it's also,
some people aren't comfortable in their own skin, or talking about kind of the negative aspects of where they are, and I get it. Some people are a bit more sheltered or reserved in what they want to share, but I don't see it as like a vulnerability. To me, it's like I have to just consider who around me that it might affect, because for me it's okay. I would share everything, right? I'm okay with that, but I think sometimes it's just more consideration for others.
But I think it's humanizing.
Yeah.
When I say that, it's like, I think it's only through shared struggle that you form bonds, right? Like if you don't appreciate what somebody has gone through in life, then you'll never understand them.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't understand what was their upbringing like, and that's the way I view it. When I always say a few people like to comment on some of my things on socials as well, and they want to have a dig or whatever, and that's fine. But I always say to them, look, I actually want to know who you are. Why have you formulated this opinion? Come and chat with me.
Yes.
Like you've now been through the experience. It's been a couple of hours, and there's been nothing really grating or agitating about the conversation. It's just, two people essentially getting
good chat.
Yeah, getting pretty deep in the weeds to try and understand each other better. And I think, if anybody listens and that resonates for them, that might allow somebody to then apply a new lens in terms of their perspective and go, oh, maybe I need to look at this thing a little bit differently. There might have been somebody with a similar family situation as you with an abusive father.
Yeah.
Right. And that might be the reason that has been holding them back their whole life. Yeah. Because my dad did this, I'm now in this position.
Yeah. And the other thing is they might have gone down a path that's the opposite, and they realize that they can course correct. It's never too late to just make a decision, a conscious decision, and go, no longer am I going to be like a victim.
Yeah.
Right. And now I'm going to, show this kind of this personal agency where I'm going to take accountability for all my actions and all my decisions moving forward. So look, it definitely the whole process of going through, think about what we did, right? Like, I no political experience at all, no background in it, nothing, just small business owner from Western Sydney that said enough's enough, and then tried to become a federal member of parliament. Like when you think about that,
it's pretty huge.
I mean, we went to Canberra, we did the the publicity stunts and all that kind of. So many good memories, and some less than ideal ones. I just remember feeling really deflated after, because I thought we had a better chance than we actually did. That's the reality of it, right? That's the kind of sobering. And so, it's just sometimes you forget that, like when you're kind of in your circle of people or that's not necessarily a true reflection of everyone's sentiment. And also the other thing I learned is just how badly we do in terms of a job of educating people on how the system works. So many people think there's only two parties, ways to vote. So many people, 22% of people that voted at the booth I was at voted informal, which is incorrect. So either they just drew a dick on the paper, or
they didn't care,
they didn't number every box or whatever, 22%. And I think nationwide it's like 10%, 11%, something like that. It's huge.
That's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people who actually went to vote and didn't have their votes actually counted.
Register, yeah.
So there's that, and then there's also like this genuine feeling of like, oh, you can't win. But that become like, unless you're part of the two-party system, you can't win. That actually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because so many people said, I'd love to vote for you, but like you're not going to win.
Yeah.
So, okay, yeah, well, if everybody says the same thing, then of course I'm not going to win.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I really, I also became better at public speaking and ability to kind of just walk up to strangers and talk to them. It's not what I'm known for typically.
You had the Johnny App experience of, when I was wheeling you around Westfields, and
that was awesome. Definitely learned a lot, and I thank you for all the help that you gave to not just me but everybody else on in terms of the team. I speak for everyone. I say that you did a fantastic job, and me personally, no offense to the other Senate candidates, but I did voted you number one, so on my ballot. So you'll always be the senator for me, mate.
Oh, thank you. All right. Well, I think that's a beautiful way to round off this discussion, and I thank you for coming on the podcast and being so open and transparent. I don't know. I was saying to Julian before we even started, I love this format. It's so raw, it's so truthful, and irrespective of whatever happens in the future, it's like I can always reflect back on this conversation and go, hey, that was a really nice time.
Yeah, it's like a frozen moment in time.
Yeah.
You get to see what their perspective was at that moment.
Yep.
All the thoughts and feelings going through them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's nice to chat with you just in general. But we get to do it in this format where we're kind of, it's a bit more structured than maybe a chat over a beer. It's good to kind of get to I go deep pretty early. It's one of those things where it's like, some conversations it's like, oh, we went straight to the hard stuff, and then I'm like trying to resurrect the conversation before somebody gets too down in the dumps. It's like, okay, let's wheel ourselves out of this misery and change topics and change gears. No, it was good, mate. I appreciate it, and thanks for providing a safe space for me to chat about it.
Yep.
So.
All right. So if people obviously want to look into, your finance options, loanoptions.ai, yeah?
Yeah, loanoptions.ai. It's powered by artificial intelligence. We're actually going to be doing a rebrand October 10th. The new logo and the new colors and the new website go live. So yeah, check it out now. But if you want to check it out then, it's pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about it. And of course, on LinkedIn, it's probably like the platform I'm most active on, Julian Fayad, and probably Insta's the only other one I use. That's kind of just the family account, right? Yep. So there's like, it's not, I still have the Julian for Para Instagram account. I don't know what to do with that.
Rebrand.
Is my antagonizing account of my competitors.
Yep.
So anyway,
it's a good keepsake.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks everyone. Thanks for listening.